my goal today is to basically introduce you all to the coastal wetlands of the GTM Reserve, because there's quite a lot of talks about coastal wetlands. And this way, all the talks can just focus more on the science and less on the introduction part. So as you're all aware, I'm sure, the coastal wetlands in Northeast Florida are iconic. The salt marshes and the mangrove stands really contribute to the beauty of our Northeast Florida home and the quality of life here. They also provide wildlife habitat, filter pollutants, and protect our shorelines, of course. So to assess the health of these habitats, GTM staff work really hard monitoring the vegetation and elevation of them. And then visiting scientists also do a lot of research to help us understand the patterns that we're seeing, and also how to help conserve these important habitats. So here's a habitat map of the reserve. And you can see in the light green are the tidal wetlands, the salt marshes and mangroves. And they comprise about 23% of the reserve, second only to open water. So they're a main habitat here. And within this habitat, we have a few dominant species. There's actually not a whole lot of biodiversity in the vegetation here. And so it's pretty easy to remember all the different dominant species that make up these wetlands. And the map that you see here is showing the different vegetation in colors. So in green, you see Spartina alterniflora. That's definitely the most dominant vegetation type we have. In orange is Batis maritima, and that's a succulent species that tends to be at higher elevations, intermixed with other vegetation. And Spartina and Batis are really dominant, especially in the north, although we do see some Juncus romerianus and some black and red mangroves moving in too. In the southern area of the reserve is also dominated by Spartina and Batis, especially in the north. But there are more areas of Juncus, or the black Mino rush, up in the freshwater reaches of the tidal creeks. And then Avicennia germinans, the black mangroves, is really starting to establish in the south and kind of be a dominant species in some of these southern marshes. So you're going to hear a lot more about that later. In terms of coastal wetland conservation, these are kind of my thoughts, just kind of how to bend different categories of the work we do related to conservation. First, just understanding the status and trends of these habitats. Also looking at the relative impacts of the various threats to them. And then engaging in opportunities like collaborative research, conservation plan development, and land acquisition. So in this short introduction today, I'm just going to kind of highlight some of the status and trends work in collaborative research. So in terms of what we do at the NERR, we've been monitoring the wetlands since 2012 using standardized monitoring protocols at both national and regional scales. So our protocols are consistent with the NERR's system-wide monitoring program, and those data are available at nerrsdata.org. And then we also have components of our protocols that are consistent with the Southeast region of the National Park Service monitoring network. So we partner with them as well. And here are just some of the many wonderful faces of the people who conduct this monitoring. And it's been a lot of work over the years to install and maintain all of this monitoring infrastructure in these muddy tidal wetlands. And then, so you'll hear all the details about this project from Pam and Ali after me. Also, in terms of status and trends, you can map or track change over time in the acreage of these wetlands. And there's a mapping product available by the St. Johns River Water Management District that we reported on in this statewide report last year. And here's the citation for the report if you're interested. But basically what we have found by looking at that same mapping data over time from 1990 to 2014 is a loss of about 9,000 acres of salt marsh with a gain of about 3,000 acres of mangroves. And this has probably changed a lot since 2014, but this is the latest available data we have. So overall, that's a 6,000 acre wetland loss, unfortunately. So about those mangroves, they're definitely establishing, moving in hot, coming in hot. And so what we've kind of been able to glean from recent research is that there are trade-offs in the mangrove and marsh transition. So mangroves seem to be better at salt marshes that in terms of keeping up with elevation, so gaining and maintaining that elevation, keeping up with sea level rise, and also protecting the shorelines from storm surge and erosion because they have that woody structure. On the other hand, grasses seem to be better than mangroves at really supporting the food web because they have annual turnover in their biomass, and the benthic microalgae on in the sediments of the salt marshes seem to really fuel the food web, and that microalgae can get shaded out by mangroves. So in terms of the opportunity side of the conservation framework, we engage a lot in collaborative research. So really like designing research for informing management. And we work a lot with university partners that you'll see talks from today, as well as public agencies, nonprofits. It's a really rewarding endeavor. And I would say that a lot of the more management application conversations we've had recently have stemmed from research out of this big NSF-funded project called WETFEET that's been led by Samantha Chapman that has so many other great people working with her. And so I just want to give a basic intro to the WETFEET project because you're going to hear a few presentations. Basically, the goal was to look at how warming and mangrove invasion impact above ground and below ground processes, and ultimately how they impact the change in elevation of our marshes. And so the team conducted warming experiments, used all that data to input into model to make predictions about how elevation will change over time, and then mapped out coastal vulnerability to help us prioritize restoration. And how this looked was the experiment was set up at 3 sites. The most northern site had the least amount of mangroves. That site's called Big Mama, and you can see this big mangrove here, that's the mom, and lots of babies around her. The middle site, Gabby's Creek, had the intermediate amount of mangroves, and the southern site is just north of the Matanzas Inlet, has the most established mangroves. And so the first kind of findings from this project were published last year and can be just broadly summarized by saying that warming impacted the mangroves differently at different sites. The northern site exhibited the largest warming effects, which you can see by the difference in the red and blue lines here. And the southern sites are growing the fastest. So I hope I have set you up well for the next few talks. I'm really looking forward to them.